In a world that is vast, vast beyond comprehension, vast beyond any individual's ability to control, there can be a sense of hopelessness. Many have probably felt this hopelessness when contemplating the future, the state of global politics, or even their place in the universe. On these massive scales of perception, one life is so small as to be meaningless. And while some may be fine with this or even feel comfortable, it's reasonable to feel helpless or afraid when thinking about how little control, how little choice we have. Night in the Woods is a 2017 side-scrolling, narrative-driven game which, in a very special way, explores these concepts. Ideas of control, choice, comfort, and accepting our place in a vast world permeate the game, its narrative, and its mechanics. The game isn't a horror game, not in the strictest sense at least. But by using very personal themes and a few horror motifs, the game manages to take one of the most influential horror authors in history and do better. Today we're going to take a deep dive and examine how. If you aren't familiar with the game, I'll offer a somewhat quick summary. But a better way to prepare for this video is to watch my playthrough here on the channel. I have a full playthrough of the game and several other story and horror games with some bad jokes and observations. If that's too much work, here we go. Night in the Woods centers around Mae Borowski, a young adult returning from college to her small town, Possum Springs. Something went wrong at college, and Mae leaves mid-semester to return home. The gameplay takes place over 12-ish days as Mae interacts with her parents, explores town, and hangs out with her old friends Gregory, Angus, and Bee. Greg is a chaotic gay rebel and Mae's best friend. Angus is his boyfriend, who's a little quiet and socially awkward, but a big softie who takes care of people. Bee is a cigarette-smoking leftist who isn't as cool and confident as she lets on, and whose rocky friendship with Mae has left their relationship distant. Mae tries to slide back into her old life, hanging out with friends, but things aren't quite the same. Mae's friends have changed, the town has changed, and Mae keeps having weird dreams and starts seeing strange figures. After witnessing a kidnapping, Mae decides to investigate what's happening, and the friends uncover a mystery in the town. A cult sacrificing people they don't believe add to society in an attempt to bring success and comfort back to Possum Springs. It's hard to get across in a summary what exactly the tone and experience of this game is. The beginning parts of the game are very calm and extremely slice of life. Character-based comedy is steady throughout. The focus of the game is very much on real characters living through these 2-ish weeks, not the horror elements that only pop up occasionally until the last third of the game. The characters come first. Without character, Night in the Woods' narrative would fall apart. Night in the Woods characters, particularly the ones closest to Mae, have to convey not only their personalities, but also their histories that they have with Mae. Each central character has a backstory, whether tied to Mae or not, because the game relies on the sensation that these characters have changed. Greg has to show that he is growing and maturing, even though he still has destructive tendencies. Bee has to feel like a friend who's grown distant, not just someone you don't know well. They reflect the town itself. Possum Springs is Mae's home, but she's been away and things changed. Businesses close down, people move on. It should feel like home, but on some level it isn't. Just as the player is discovering the town for the first time, Mae is learning to navigate the town that is familiar, but unfamiliar. One of the driving forces of both the narrative and the sensation of discomfort in Night in the Woods is the uncanny. Most of you probably recognize the word from the idea of the uncanny valley, the phenomenon where people don't like faces or objects that are almost human, but just off enough to be threatening. This is actually named after the idea of the uncanny, specifically the uncanny as defined by Freud. Even though the science of the human mind has advanced a long way past Freud, his writings had a massive impact on literature studies, and one important way is through his essay, The Uncanny. In his essay, Freud argues that the uncanny is that class of terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. Basically, the uncanny is that feeling when something is familiar but twisted or changed in some way. For the uncanny valley, it's the human face, but a location can also be uncanny, like going back to an elementary school as an adult. It's somewhat recognizable, but the scale is all wrong because you aren't small anymore. Thinking back to Night in the Woods, the uncanny sensation is almost immediately brought both to the narrative and the mechanics. Movement in Night in the Woods almost always starts at the right and moves left. While this may seem like a simple choice, think about every platformer you've ever played. From Mario to Sonic and basically everything that followed, platformer games like this travel from left to right. Mechanically, this already creates an uncanny feeling. We, the player, are accustomed to walking a certain way in these games, and that pattern is broken up. But there's also a meaning behind this choice. Most of those platformers are made in either Japan or America, and both of those countries' written languages, at least in modern times, read from left to right. Both programmers and players are trained to see that movement from left to right as progress, as moving forwards. So May's movement against this pattern shows her desire to move back, to return home, to get back to something familiar. And yet, things have changed even at home. May's return home is fraught with changes. Restaurants close, new businesses open, teenagers treat her like an adult. Friends aren't like they used to be. May is surrounded by the uncanny. The town is familiar, the people are familiar, but it isn't the same. It isn't the return home she desires. Even home life isn't the same, as May has to face the fact that her parents might lose their house. Both Bea and Greg even say things have changed. Bea comments that she kept on growing up while May was at college. Greg offers that he has changed, and May needs to let him change more. All of this without mentioning May's discovery of a severed arm, kidnappings, and a cult in the woods. Change is integral to May's character because change, particularly the changes related to becoming an adult, are what frightens May, what drives her on this mission to return home. We learn in the climax of the story that May is running from college because of mental health issues. While I am not an expert at all in mental health, and the game doesn't label it for us, I believe that May suffers from stress-related dissociative attacks. In these moments, May dissociates with her reality and everything becomes just shapes, losing the meaning and emotions that should be associated with them. Having experienced a similar moment one time in my life on a much smaller scale, it's a pretty scary thing. May's description of these moments reveals a lot about her, and the lack of control she felt. I couldn't make friends. I was just afraid of being outside or around people alone. There was this statue of like the founder or something. Really shitty statue, like all rusty metal. And it was these shapes. And he was pointing down at me. And I was so scared. I didn't leave my room. I either didn't eat or ate entire pizzas at once. I downed cough syrup just to sleep all the time. Dude. I finally got the courage to leave. And I came home where everything was fine. Where I knew everyone. And it wasn't just dead shapes watching me. Jeez, dude. Something broke in my head, in my life. Dude, you should have called me. We could have come and rescued you. Would have kidnapped you. I couldn't call home either. I couldn't even talk to anyone. I don't even know why. I didn't even come home for longest night. I just stayed in my room, in bed. That's horrible, dude. Being unable to talk to people, unable to just call home and ask for help, May associates big changes with a loss of control. And that's another huge aspect of this game. Let's look at our four leads, May and her close friends. As we already established, May is running from change, running from the feeling that she lost something. She even says as much as in her final confrontation with the hole at the center of everything. May is scared, running, and defenseless because her world changed, and that loss of normalcy, of control, is her driving force. Greg and Angus are working constantly to leave Possum Springs. Being the only queer people in town and needing to get away from Angus's troubled past, the two work near full-time jobs, saving most of their money for a chance to leave, to move to a bigger city that will be better for both of them. Angus in particular has a strong history of a lack of control, with abusive parents locking him in the pantry. Angus describes being locked in there for up to a day at a time, wishing for psychic powers so he could save himself, even as he began to feel guilty, like he deserved to be in there. For Angus and Greg, escaping town would finally be a measure of control in lives which have left them feeling trapped. And Bee is trapped in a different sense. Though we didn't see much of her story in the channel playthrough, Bee's story is also one of loss of control and choice. Bee's family runs the local tool shop, and after her mother passed away, her father became incapable of running the business. Bee wanted more, would have loved to go to college, but her choice was taken away from her. Bee has to run the business and take care of her father, and she might be stuck at the Rusty Pickaxe for years or more despite her desire to move, learn, and her resentment of capitalism. That's a major part of why her relationship with May is so strained. May got everything Bee ever wanted and ran away from it. In fact, one of the Bee scenes we didn't experience in the channel playthrough has one of the most meaningfully meaningless choices in the game. Bee complains to May that she didn't have a choice, and May's only responses are a choice between, "You always have a choice," and "You can always choose." Think about those options. Is there even a choice there? If you have played choice-driven games, you're probably familiar with how games handle branching pathways. It takes a lot of work to make a fully branching story where choices can change massive story details, so most fall back on creating smaller branches that eventually lead back to the same events. You might have seen games that either allow some choice but always follow the same basic path, or games where choices are simply tallied up to change the ending. It's rare to find a game that's willing to create different content for every choice you make. Night in the Woods is no different. Choices either change dialogue or at most allow a small branch before returning to the story at large. But Night in the Woods plays with the illusion of that choice. Illusion of choice is the narrative concept of offering something that seems like a choice, but actually isn't. Probably the most noticeable and worst example of this is in some of the later Pokemon games where a character will ask you to do something for them, and you can say no, but they just say, "Come on, please," until you say yes. Night in the Woods instead plays with the lack of choice. There are moments like the one discussed earlier, or when May, looking in the mirror, can choose which part of her body she doesn't like. She can't choose to like who she is, just which part she's unhappy with. Even we the player have little choice in the story. Really, all we can do is choose who to hang out with, but that only impacts one day at a time. Whatever choices you make, you still don't really have control. So, what does any of this have to do with a horror author? Well, we're almost there. The lack of control, the lack of choice within Night in the Woods is the thing that represents what's frightening and dangerous for these characters. The sensation that the universe is against them, or at least too big to care. And that genre of horror might be familiar to you, if done in a different way. The horror, at the center of everything, is a cosmic one. Cosmic horror is universally associated with one man, H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft is pretty well known, and we're already pretty deep in the video, so I don't want to cover a lot about him, but there's something really important you have to know. Lovecraft's horror and mythos couldn't exist without his really troubling racism and xenophobia. I want to be clear. It's okay to like Lovecraft's work, and if cosmic horror is scary or fun for you, it does not make you a racist. Your interaction with the text is entirely your own, and the author's intention has nothing to do with your experience. But we can't have a scholarly conversation about cosmic horror without addressing it. Lovecraft's horror is often based in a fear of a massive, uncaring universe, involving a pantheon of gods which either don't care or actively use or hate humanity, cults which worship those gods, and odd creatures. Lovecraft stories center around the fear inspired by the realization that the individual, or humanity as a whole, is insignificant and powerless. There's a lot more depth to Lovecraft than I care to address, especially in a video about a game, but in order to make a comparison, I need to share a few examples just to show what I mean when I say that Night in the Woods does a better job. The most famous versions of the Lovecraft story feature a character who relates the tale of how they discovered some greater truth about the world or themselves, and how that discovery drove them mad. One of the most famous examples of these is Shadows over Innsmouth, a novella which follows this formula. The main character, Robert Olmsted, explains his time spent in the town of Innsmouth, how he discovered the people were worshipping strange god, learns that the people of the town are descendants of humans mating with fish-like monsters, and ultimately discovers that he is also one of these descendants, which drives him to madness. There's a lot more, but I hope you see the pattern, and maybe some ways this story is similar to Night in the Woods. A visitor comes to a small town, discovers a cult, learns of godlike beings, etc. The character discovering that they aren't fully human is even a recurring theme of Lovecraft's. A similar discovery occurs in Facts Concerning the Late Arthur Germain and His Family, in which Germain discovers that his great-great-great-grandmother was not a noble, and instead a, quote, white ape goddess, close quote, from Africa. And this discovery prompts him to kill himself. Yeah, that's a thinly veiled metaphor for a man killing himself because he's 1/32nd African. Like Night in the Woods, the horror for these characters is that they have lost control. Something that seemed familiar changed, but I hope you can see the difference. For Lovecraft, the scariest thing was that other things exist, that there are other people and forces that might be different or worse have an influence on him. It's xenophobia, clear as day. In fact, the most famous line Lovecraft ever wrote is probably a perfect summary of this point of view. Lovecraft opens the Call of Cthulhu with these sentences: "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far." This quote is quite literally an argument that learning new things is scary, and it's better if we stay ignorant. Again, I want to say it's fine if you like Lovecraft. I like some of his stories, but it's also important to recognize, if you want to have a serious conversation about cosmic horror, that it originates from a fear that there are people or things that are different, and a fear that those different things might change us. And that's where Night in the Woods changes the story for the better. Night in the Woods is also a cosmic horror at its heart. That's not even me speculating. The game calls out Lovecraft in the epilogue, with a reference to one of my favorite Lovecraft stories, The Color Out of Space. The game's formula is a simple twist on Shadows over Innsmouth. May arrives in a small town, her own in this case, investigates strange occurrences, meets godlike beings in her dreams, and ultimately discovers a cult that worships one of these gods. The differences, though, are critical. There are plenty of smaller changes that help, like May actually having a mental health issue, not a generic madness. But there are two other major changes that really elevate the story: the town itself and the godlike being. Possum Springs is a far cry from Innsmouth. This is because Possum Springs is designed to be like a real town. It isn't an evil town full of monsters, it's a place where people live and work. The setting of a rural American town is perfect for the themes we have already discussed. Like real-world small towns, Possum Springs was a prosperous mining town with promise and prospects until the closure of the mines and the building of a new highway that diverted basically all income. These towns become full of people trapped, unable to leave because they can't afford to go somewhere else. The town was once comfortable, but change happened, and it was bad. And it can feel like there was no control, just like with May. There are good people here, but it's awash in the same uncanny changes and loss of control prevalent throughout the game. It also makes a powerful location for the themes of unionization and collapsed capitalism, which the game delivers throughout. This backdrop makes the message of the game feel real. We aren't worried about a town of magical fish people, we're worried about the people who struggle to live in an all-too-real small town. This even defines the goals of the cult. Listen to the cult leader for a moment. We are not monsters. We do it because we love our home. Long as we keep doing this, Possum Springs survives. Things can get better. These mines are gonna be humming again someday. Old mills puffing smoke. You kids don't understand that. We lost what our world was built around. Used to be you provided for a family, bought a house. Now you're stocking shelves at the grocery store. Kids leaving more than they're staying. No opportunity here. Old people dying, houses left empty. You ever seen that? A home become tumbled in pile of wood and plaster. Job become a burned out brick box or a hole in the ground. But we can change that. We can put this place back together, where it won't be just shapes. The cult, just like May, is afraid of change, of losing control. They long for the good old days and decided to sacrifice human lives to keep things the way they were. They too are running from change, trying desperately to get home. And that's the second big change from Lovecraft. Though May and the cult are afraid of change, the monster, the eldritch god in this story, isn't threatening to change things, it threatens to keep them the same. The hole at the center of everything takes lives, and exchange keeps the town alive, keeps things comfortable and controlled. The threat here isn't alien or other people, it's stagnancy. It uses the fear of change, tempts people to sacrifice so that they never have to face the real world. It offers control. And just as importantly, May doesn't give in. This isn't a story about fighting change or remaining ignorant, it's about accepting change and facing it, even when it hurts. I know what you are now. I think I knew before, but, you know, after I sent that kid to the hospital years ago, they said I had an anger problem. But that's not true. I was angry because of something else. Something I'd lost. Trying so hard since not to be angry got me all defenseless. And I lost more and more and more. That's not getting better. I want to be angry. When I ran home from college, on the bus I had this dream, or maybe I saw it out the window. Last leaf on the tree, finally blown off. I'm so scared all the time, and the fear hurts. Feeling like everything is over was over long before I got here, so long hiding or trying to outrun this. I get it. This won't stop until I die. But when I die, I want it to hurt. When my friends leave, when I have to let go, when this entire town is wiped off the map, I want it to hurt bad. I want to lose. I want to get beaten up. I want to hold on until I'm thrown off and everything ends. And you know what? Until that happens, I want to hope again. And I want it to hurt because that means it meant something. That means I am something at least. Pretty amazing to be something at least. Night in the Woods shows a cosmic horror. It's a story about how frightening the realization is that the universe can be big and uncaring. But it doesn't stop there. It lets us know that even if the universe doesn't care, you don't have to feel trapped on that massive scale. There's a personal scale of perception too. And on that level, there are people out there who work together, who help each other, and who care. The game even tells us this in the form of Angus. I believe in a universe that doesn't care, and people who do. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please feel free to subscribe, leave a comment, leave a like, and share with friends. It really helps. I love hearing thoughts and opinions. All scholarship is a discussion, not an expert telling everyone else what to think. So if you have thoughts or even disagree, feel free to let me know, as long as it's constructive or at least polite.